Boker Tov. Very nice to see everybody who has joined us here and those who are joining us online. It's nice to be able to do this program in person. I think the last 2 years, right, we're online. And those were wonderful, but it's nice to be able to see Anne in person and to be able to have some time to schmooze and spend time together as well. We have this week Parshat Vayishlach, which begins with Yaakov and his clan, which is quite a big group now, heading back to the land of Israel. And there's some unfinished business that has to be taken care of. Right? When he left with this departure, right, from Esav. He was running for his life. And now, as he's coming back in, he has to figure out, are they going to be able to figure out a way to work together? Right? Or are they going to end up in war with one another? And at least in this instance, right, they find a way to be able to say, we have our differences, we're not always going to agree, but you'll go and do your thing, I'll go do my thing, and we'll be able to figure out a way to do so without being at war. Later generations, we won't get into that right now. I think that is an apt beginning for our program this morning, because as we head into a new legislative session for the state of Maryland, right, we know that almost anything important that gets done, even with all the partisanship that exists, needs to involve compromise and finding a way to be able to work together across lines. Very few major pieces of legislation will get through just on one party vote. And so the ability to come together and to be able to debate, to have real discussion and consideration of the issues, whether it's within a party or between parties, is really such an important piece that we see demonstrated in the Parsha this week, and we see demonstrated pretty regularly up in Annapolis when things are going well. And so we do this legislative briefing not to say, here are the opinions that you should have about the issues, but to talk about what are the issues and what are the things that are going to matter. Where's the legislature going to be focused, and how does that affect us as citizens in the state of Maryland and us as a Jewish community? And so we're very grateful that Ann does this for us each year, and I want to ask Sally to come on up to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Rabbi. And thank you, Anne, in advance. My name is Sally Cram. I'm the director. I'm sorry, that's my day job. I'm the vice president for programs at Tikvat Israel Congregation. And I want to thank everyone who helps make this event possible, including Tikvat Israel staff, Aaron Chusid, and Augustine, who set up the tables, Roz Cram, who made sure that the magic happened. And it's my way of segueing into what today's discussion is about, which is community and being involved. You've heard this spiel from me many years. We've done this program now, Anne, at least 10, I think. And it grew out of both my appreciation that a member of Tikvat Israel is an elected official to the Maryland House of Delegates, as well as my personal appreciation for local government. I think local government gets overlooked by a lot of people because the national media follows, the president's breathing patterns on a daily basis, to a lesser extent the Senate and the U.S. House of Representatives, but where the action is, the state level, tends to get ignored. And unless and until you understand the importance of the issues that our state legislator takes on and manages, I think you may not be a fully engaged member of our community. That sounds a little judgmental, but I feel quite strongly about it. I will note that over the past year, we've noticed the impact of state legislatures across the country when we found out that states determine how elections are run and states determine how abortions are accessed. So, that being said, let me introduce our speaker, Ann Kaiser, who many of you know is a member of Tikvat Israel. She was just elected to her 6th 4-year term as a member in Montgomery County. She represents the 14th District here in Montgomery County, and she is a member of the Health and Government Operations Committee. Her previous service included time as chair of the Powerful Ways and Means Committee, majority leader, vice chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and chair of the Montgomery County delegation, the largest in the state, which begs the question, what haven't you done in Annapolis? Ann grew up in Montgomery County, graduating from Rockville High School, which many of you may know is right next door. Before earning her bachelor's degree from the University of Chicago and 2 master's degree from the University of Michigan. And as I told the rabbi, we will have no University of Michigan comments today.
But you can't tell that.
Anyway, she is a clinical professor at the University of Maryland, College Park, and teaches 3 courses in the School of Public Policy. She is a lifetime member of Tikvat Israel and lives with her wife, Nancy, and their daughter, Allison Joan, AJ, in the Calverton neighborhood of Silver Spring.
Thank you. Well, I was going to go there, Roz, but thank you. I will mention that as well. I'm going to move this over so I can be close to my notes and maybe even occasionally sit down. But thank you, Sally, for inviting me. Thank you for everyone who's here. I hear there's people online as well. Good morning. Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, if you're on Facebook, friend me, but it's really smarter to friend my wife when she doesn't tag me because she's the one who posts all the great pictures of AJ. AJ is 3.5, a real joy, and I know she's come to synagogue, but when she was a baby during the high holidays, because otherwise now, the running around, it's fun and enjoyable, but it would be hard for me to get through this talk. But yes, Roz is right. Yes, I was. My brothers and I all went to Hebrew school here. My brother Jeff got married here. I am a graduate of the preschool from here. And as I also say, coming up on fact, so my parents joined this synagogue in 1965. I joined them a few years later. But we're coming up in April for my 55th anniversary of my baby naming. So that's the long-time connection. Now, my birthday's in February. Why was the baby naming in April? Please, for anyone who knows my father, is he going to take off for a baby naming during tax season? So they literally had to wait until after April 15th to do the baby naming. So he apparently did take off the day I was born, which was a Saturday. So we'll give him that. So I have been giving this talk for years, and there's certainly familiar faces, and Roz, who I've known forever, and it really has been, just so amazing over the years to think about all the people that I've known since I was a very young kid and still involved in the synagogue. Deborah Diamond was, I think, my first grade teacher in the Hebrew school, and I'm trying to. I'm escaping on the name of my nursery school teacher, but that will come back to me. Joyce Levengard. Oh my God, yes, Joyce. So all those connections. So when I come give this talk every year, I give some things that are the same. And unfortunately, I'm going to do the same again. because I always know that there's going to be a few new faces and people who are maybe less familiar with the political process, so I want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on. I do agree that people end up following the federal government more often around here. And of course, it's what's on TV all the time, but people miss the state and local, and the realization that most things that impact you on a daily basis are what the state and local government are doing. And I will talk in a little bit more about some changes that are coming to the county government and to state government as well. But to me, the local, it's more than just the snow removal, the trash, and the street lights. It's a lot of quality of life issues related to zoning and economic development and the decisions on where schools are going and where transit is going and where we need to develop different parts of the area better or worse. A lot of it has to do with, where are the schools, where's the water, where's the other, the infrastructure that we have. So again, a lot of those decisions are made on the local level. From the state perspective, it's bigger issues that aren't always the day-to-day, but sometimes they are. But we've done some big things like banning the death penalty, which to me is the, I guess I can design my own gravestone, but that would be one of the top two things I feel like we did. I felt like it was so important, a real reflection of our, and I know people have different views on this. I think my wife doesn't agree with me on this one, but to me, it just says a lot about our humanity and about the decisions we make. But the things we can do here in the state in terms of preserving our environment, the decisions we've made about guns, the things we can do with healthcare to ensure that people get greater access and greater coverage and greater care. As I've always said, and people may be used to this, from my perspective, I share that what our job is putting values into action, and hopefully the values of our constituents into action. I've long said that the guiding force, later on I'm saying a lot of it is about tikkun olam and repairing the world, but I often reference that it's the idea of helping the least among us, and that to me is what I feel comes from my Jewish heritage, training, culture, and all the rest. And then after using the quote for more than 10 years, I had to Google it, and it's Jesus who said it. But, he lived and died as a Jew, so it comes from that same place. But I do think that, to me, that is what we should do, and that's really the measure of us as a society. For the recap in terms of, I've got to move this back a little bit, give myself a little more space here. In terms of Annapolis and describing what we do, there's 141 members in the House of Delegates. We have 6 different committees. So it's not always obvious why certain issues go along with some others, but it doesn't leave that many choices on things. It can be bipartisan. Obviously, it has its partisan moments. I would, one of the things that the rabbi said was that, that we should really work with the other party, and I agree. In Annapolis, we have a supermajority, and which means we can do what we want without appealing to what the Republican members need. And for the past 8 years, we've had a Republican governor, so he could veto something if he didn't like it, and we would often override his veto. And now we have a Democratic governor coming in, so the threshold to pass bills is even lower. But I think it is irresponsible when we don't consider the views of others. While our legislature may be more than 2/3 Democratic, the people in our state are all across the spectrum in their political interests. And when we're thinking of passing something important, like increasing the minimum wage or doing something with health care, that's often a Democratic value and something a lot of us believe in, but it doesn't mean that an amendment here and an idea there should just be ignored. And I do think it's important to listen to, quote, the other side and realize that they too represent 100,000 plus people, and that important views to cover. So things are relatively bipartisan. The relationships are pretty strong. It's hard to believe that, again, when you watch the national news. And I've heard from national legislators that it really wasn't always that way. And part of the challenge is they arrive either late Monday night or early Tuesday morning to Washington, D.C., again, back to our Congress, and they leave late Thursday night, and their schedules are packed from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and they're doing fundraising. And when you believe that the other side is evil, whichever side you're on of issues, and you don't actually get to meet people, it's easy to believe those things. And in Annapolis, we're able to develop real relationships. It's who you're sitting next to on committee, who you're sitting next to on the House floor. Committees go out for dinner, people go out for drinks, people engage in different things, and you discover that these people are good people, and that just about everyone, I always tell people, of the 141 members, 130 plus of us are coming with the goal of doing hard work and representing our constituents and living by our values. And I'll never name who the ones I'm excluding from that. But that I mean that about people across the spectrum. And people over time have really trouble believing this. Very conservative member from Western Maryland, his name is Andy Serafini, he left, he was in the state House of Delegates and then the state Senate. He said no one could ever believe that I was one of his two best friends in Annapolis. And my wife and I are incredibly fond of him. He didn't vote for our right to marry each other, and he's a social conservative, and he's really religious. But over time, we had the good fortune of getting to know each other and growing quite fond of each other, and just understanding that people are just coming from a different place, and that it's just so important to remember. And those relationships, again, used to exist federally, and what we see on TV and what we hear, it can be quite distressing. And I think it's so dangerous when people assume that the other side is bad or evil or has ill intentions. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes too, all of that. The other part I always like people to understand is that, nothing is easy. People always come with, well, why don't you solve this? Why don't you do that? It's just, we didn't get to these problems overnight. We're not going to solve them overnight. The other challenge is really there's no such thing as a no-brainer for all the times people bring in legislation or ideas that they think are so easy. Even the easiest things have challenges. And no one gets exactly what they want. There's 141 of us, even the Speaker of the House. Not every provision has to be perfect to her. It's a compromise, and we all can't get fully what we want. I do want to mention the committee process, partly because I want to invite people to engage and be involved and come testify. I mean, I certainly see Michael and Debbie Amster coming to advocate, and I'm sure, and talking to legislators through Jews United for Justice, and others may have done so as well, but it's also being part of the coming to the committee hearings and testifying and being a part of things, and that it could be probably easier on how to let people know when the legislation is coming and what's going on, but certainly you can contact me and I can maybe give you a better insight and let you know when those things are happening. But it's really important that we rely on everyone's expertise. I feel like, have I told the breast cancer checkoff story too many times? Do people remember? Or because it's always a year apart? Well, once you start hearing it, it will come back to you. So, on your state tax form, you have the opportunity. All right, I'm seeing some, oh yeah, we've heard this one. But again, for the new people, and a reminder for everyone else how nothing is easy. Because think about how complex, if you are, for all the times anyone who works in the healthcare industry wants to talk to me about healthcare issues, like those are complex issues. And just getting people to understand them is hard enough. So how about an issue that everyone understands? So you get your state tax form, and you can voluntarily contribute to the Chesapeake Bay Fund for breast cancer research. I keep knowing that we've added a third, and I apologize for not knowing it right now, but that doesn't take away from the story. So at the time, many years ago, a colleague of mine said, we should add breast cancer research funding to one of these voluntary things. 141 members in the House of Delegates. This guy, Delegate Barkley, gets all 140 other members to be co-sponsors on his bill. I feel happy to get 20 or 30 people to be behind it. So every single member of the House of Delegates is behind it. Everyone understands it. I don't know if I've ever met a family that's untouched by breast cancer. And then when you think about all the different relations from not just that wife, mother, daughter, sister, but that it could men get it as well. There's no one unafflicted in some way by it. So everyone gets it. It's voluntary. It's easy. You come to the public hearing, and Shame on them, for my opinion. Is this being recorded? The Chesapeake Bay Fund and the other group were like, please don't add a third group because we'll get less. And so, turns out that hasn't been true, but I have had people demonstrate since then in adding, if we were to add a fourth or a fifth, that there is something about consumer choices, and that when you start getting more than 3 choices, people do start walking away and feeling more confused and are less likely to engage. So there might be something to it. But then the comptroller's office at the time came in and said, wait, you keep adding more checkoffs. Yes, some people file their state taxes electronically, but some are still doing it by paper. And at some point, there might be an extra piece of paper. And then that becomes like a taxpayer burden, and that becomes a cost in the comptroller's office of how many pieces of paper are copied or printed or run through or something else. And then it becomes this big to-do. And, our last day of session, the second Monday in April, we finished at midnight, and it passed at 11:55 p.m. The easiest bill that everyone was behind and not a soul had a question about was still challenging. That will maybe make you wonder how we can even pass a few hundred bills every year. But I just always want to tell that as a reminder of when people are like, you all are idiots. How can you not pass these bills? How can you not do these things? Don't you see this or don't you see that? And again, it's just not easy, quite that easy. I do want to give a little bit of an election recap to talk about some of the new people coming in, some of the new faces, and some of the challenges. And I'm going to lead that into a mention about elections in general, as I think the rabbi referenced, certainly scary, the election deniers that are out there. What we have right now, I'm sure it's not a surprise to people that, yes, we have a new governor, Wes Moore, new Lieutenant Governor Aruna Miller, Attorney General Anthony Brown, and new Comptroller Brooke Learman. In this case, we have our first African-American governor. We have our first Indian-American. Actually, I think she's the first Indian-American to be lieutenant governor or higher across the nation. A first black attorney general and our first female comptroller. So, I think those are all good things. Yes? To statewide office, but not statewide, because of Barbara Mikulski, our senator, who in fact is the longest serving woman in the history of our United States Congress, with her time in the House and the Senate. But yes, to a state office, yes. So a lot of firsts this time, and a lot of excitement. The other thing about all of this is that it's just there's the newness, a new governor. Without that background in government before, it will be slow up and running. I would argue it's going to be a little different. So I think it remains to be seen in some ways of what his priorities are and how he will affect them and what will happen. But I'm happy to have someone definitely more aligned with the goals that I care about. But we can all wait a year and have that discussion next year of how we rate his first year in office. Our new delegation here in Montgomery County, we're the largest in the state. We've actually added 2 members because of redistricting, and not the negative side of redistricting, but the positive. Our county has grown faster that there's the northern part of the county that I actually used to represent that's now part of a Howard County district, which brought in 2 new delegates. So we have grown even further. And get out of 34, I'm going to have to get used to that new number, only 4 are new, which is very unusual. So that bodes well for Montgomery County, and if anyone is curious about their members and how to reach them, you can always reach me. I know I'm in the directory. I know my Yahoo address that I've had for over 20 years that I still use primarily is in there. So you can, if you need to reach the person who represents you. I was going through the count last night for myself, and it's something to be proud of, but I don't know if it's so public or if everyone else would be quite as comfortable with it. We have 8 state senators, 5 of them are Jewish, and of our 26 House members, 7 of us are. So it's not quite as demonstrative as it is among our senators. But I often think that is a reflection of Montgomery County and its values, and I've always thought the reason why this county is as votes as liberal as it does generally is because of the predominance of the Jewish community here and the values that come with it. And so, again, I don't mean to exclude. I came from a house, I mean, I'm not outing him now, but my dad and my brothers were all Republicans when I was growing up. Back in the old days when Republican moderates existed, my dad changed in '98 for me, so he could vote for me when I ran for a county position on our Democratic Central Committee, and my brothers were upset at him. Jeff became a Democrat a few years later, and Phil's now an independent out in California. So, I also, so we have our Montgomery County delegation. And when I mention the Jewish members, I just think, again, it just goes back to those shared values in terms, again, of tikkun olam, how we look at a lot of ethical issues and so forth. And so I do think our framework is very similar for that reason. Our county council, so I just mentioned this because there was a big to-do 4 years ago that when people elected all of us to the state legislature, at the same time you had, 4 years ago, 9 council members and only 1 was a woman. And now what you have are 5 male veterans and then 6 new people, all who are women. So, and our school board's all women, so I think you men should be up in arms about your lack of representation in elected office here in the county. But our county council will be an interesting dynamic, I think, with the male veterans and the women who are new. So that's something to watch. And I just suggest that, again, as with the state legislature, that people get involved and engage and look for those opportunities because we can't all be experts. Before I talk about the election fraud stuff, I did want to talk about some of the candidates that ran for governor in this past cycle. And one of them was Dan Cox, who was the Republican nominee for governor. And I joked with one of my Republican colleagues who I saw recently, and I said, boy, Dan Cox, the gift that keeps on giving. We won 2 new Senate seats. We won 4 more House seats, county executive races in Howard, Anne Arundel, and Frederick County that are typically competitive, all went on the Democratic side. But at the same time, his politics is so incredibly dangerous and so awful. And, you know, our own current governor would refer to Dan Cox as a QAnon whack job. And before you wonder about my partisanness, I'm going to say the nicest things about the lady who ran against him in the primary. But let me just tell you about Dan Cox. Probably should have shared this all before the elections for everyone. I'm sure there could be some Republicans in the room and some Republicans listening who are like, yeah, who needs that Democratic supermajority? Let's have some balance here. Well, we were debating a bill a few years back about mental health care for teenagers and about the fact that many of us believe that teenagers should have the right to seek care in some cases even without their parents' permission. And it's so great to see the school psychologist nodding his head saying, oh my God, yes, 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 of course. Thank you. But not everyone believes so, and a lot of people think that goes against parental rights, and there's a lot of conversation about bringing parents back into education and some concerns. But I mean, I think they would probably both tell you that part of the reason you need that is because in some cases it is the parents who are causing the damage or the trauma or the challenges. And it's hard sometimes to believe, but there are bad parents out there, people who are probably shouldn't be allowed to be parents. So during this debate, Dan Cox stood up, and he said that allowing children to, because this wouldn't have allowed like 8-year-olds, it still would have had some, I don't remember the age range, but allowing teenagers to do this would be equivalent to the Holocaust and Joseph Mengele's experiments on people. And even just repeating the words now get me so angry. I got up, I went to like, just so happens 4 Jewish colleagues were all in a row, and they one of them stood up. She's the one who used to bang her desk anytime someone would say the word Jesus during a prayer. But she stood up and complained against it, and then I worked with the other, I always love it, the other 18. I always love that it's high, plus me. But the other 18 Jewish members and I coordinated a letter and to basically tell Dan Cox about himself and why, we thought what he said was so incredibly offensive and how much he misunderstood. And to make that analogy, really, there are no words. And he didn't understand it. He doubled down and came back about, really that it was inappropriate for us to use General Assembly letterhead to chastise him for what he did and that what he said wasn't so wrong. It's just hard to explain to people how bad that is. So he ran in the primary against Kelly Schultz, a Republican who was the choice of our current governor, who had been a state delegate, who had served as our governor's Secretary of Labor and then his Secretary of Commerce. I like Kelly. She's a good person. Do I disagree? Do I agree with her on all the fundamental values? No. Do I know that her heart is in the right place? Yes. Do I believe that she seeks to divide people? No. Just a few weeks ago, I was quite fortunate for the third or fourth time to have her come speak to my class at the University of Maryland. And I was kind of lucky because my wife, who also teaches, had already gotten Kelly for that night, so it was easy for me to kind of tag on. But what I said to my students was just that, all those things, that I like Kelly. And I didn't explicitly come out and say, I still wanted the Democrat to win the general election. But what I instead said was that if Kelly had been our governor, I would have been so proud to have our first woman governor. And I would have been so proud that it was a friend of mine and that, she's a good person. And it's just, again, when we talk in these partisan settings and we so easily, one camp good, one camp bad, Dan Cox, bad. Kelly Schultz, good. I mean, it's not that simple. It's not just a partisan thing. And I just believe it very strongly, and I want to give that example. In fact, in Kelly Schultz's case, she made a major faux pas 2 years ago, and I knew she was running for governor, and she put out a bad word on Facebook. And we called her. We texted her, and we were like, Kelly, you got to take this off. I didn't want her hurting herself that way, because I didn't want this coming back to bite her later. I mean, I actually care. And partly because I care about our election system, and I care about our government. And I am so worried, and I was telling the rabbi, I should have emailed him at the time how much I loved, in particular, they're all good, but one sermon in particular this past high holiday was for me like a grand slam home run, and he's going to send them to me because it made me think about not just being involved, but that civility that we need and what's happening right now in our country. And so, there was no election fraud found in this state. There was no election fraud found during the presidential election back in 2020. And if you want any evidence of that, you can ask all the election administrators from all 50 states, more Republicans than Democrat, that no fraud was found. Is there such thing as a perfect election? Is there such thing as a perfect anything? No. Some people get nervous because of the timing of the results. And so I did want to mention something about that. So elections happen not on the first Tuesday, but on the first Tuesday following the first Monday. My own theory is they don't want an election on November 1st, the day after Halloween. I don't really know the reason, but it can never be November 1st. It can only be the 2nd through the 8th. So the first Tuesday after the first Monday. And then that used to be when the bulk of people voted, and Montgomery County and other places would have their results. They even used to have the first votes since from noon. They could report that soon after 8 o'clock. And then the ones later that day would come later on. And then 2 days later, Thursday, is when the absentee ballots get counted, if they were mailed in by the right time. And then we, over time, had something called provisional ballots of people who maybe made a mistake and were given a different kind of ballot. And I can go into that more, but I don't know if it's worth it. But that's the Monday following the election. And then Thursday later that week, so now 9 days from our original election day, is the last chance to count late received, what were then called absentee ballots, which are today mail-in ballots. And those could be from any of us because for whatever reason our mail took more than 2 days to get to the Board of Elections if you mailed it at the last minute. And overseas are people who live and work overseas and are current members of our armed services that could be across the world. So there's always been that time to get that. And seemingly now people are up in arms saying, why does it take so long? And what's going on? And why are we counting this way? And we always had the answers on the first. No, we didn't. That's just not true. I'd be glad to further get into that. But that's always been the process. And so the world has changed since the pandemic. How many people here used mail-in ballots this time? All right, so I'm saying like not quite a third of the hands, but that might fit the electorate. And so it used to be like 5 to 10% of the voters voted that way, and now it's like 30%. And so they're coming later. And so there's a reason why the final results in a few races take longer. And so I mean, I can go down that path a lot longer, but whatever we can all do to support our governance and to be both not sore winners nor sore losers, and to recognize when the other side has won and how important it is to look at all that. So, again, yeah, Kelly Schultz would have, well, I actually was surprised. Dan Cox did seemingly accept these results. He seemed shocked, and I guess that would be my last election point. He seemed shocked that he lost by so much, but that's, they've been showing demographic research. I mean, people who vote one way now more likely congregate in certain counties, and people who vote another way more likely live elsewhere. And so you can live in an echo chamber and believe everyone around you feels a certain way. And what we all don't realize is, obviously, here in Montgomery County, here in this congregation, I'm sure, there's some very conservative people. And just like in Western Maryland, which votes very conservative, they have a lot of super liberals, but people are often less likely to wear that on their shirt and announce that quite so much. So people seem surprised that there are other views out there. Not even paying attention to time at all, I apologize. On the issues for this session, one of the things I've always mentioned in the past is that that Maryland has always had the strongest governor when it comes to budgeting. But in fact, 2 years ago, maybe not everyone here, but the state passed a constitutional amendment to change some of that budgetary authority. And so before I scare you with that and what all of that means, and that we gave more value to more power to the legislature, is apparently the legislature bankrupted the state like 100 years ago, and then someone said, oh no, and this is always a mistake in public policy, something goes wrong, so let's create this big fix that probably overstepped. In Maryland, up until this year, the governor would propose a budget, and the legislature could only cut. And we couldn't move from one category to the other. We could cut something far enough to make the governor want to compromise and maybe move something over, but the legislature didn't have the power to move things as they do in the other 49 states. And so the constitutional amendment was passed. The talking point at the time was that the legislature was going to bankrupt the state again, but it still has to be a balanced budget. And whatever the governor first proposes, the legislature still can't go over the top. So I'm not sure how we're supposedly bankrupting the state when we can move from priority A to priority B. But if people hear about that. As with every year, education is a big push, and understanding that kids who are born in certain zip codes have a greater chance of success in school than other children. When in teaching and learning about this, if you've ever heard of, like, I'm sure the privileged knapsack, the first question is, do you have more than 50 books in your home? Do you know that there's some kids out there that don't own a single book? Should we be surprised about what they don't know, and when they get to school, and when they're behind? And what I think we should all do more to get them up to speed by the time they start kindergarten, and the fact that their school systems need even more after that. When, my daughter recognizes a monarch butterfly, she knows what a trapezoid is. I mean, that was a real post I put on Facebook, that as we're driving down the road and she says, what rhymes with trapezoid? And my reaction was, I didn't know she knew the word rhyme. But seriously, she had never used the word rhyme before. Recently, we've been playing that game, what rhymes with bug? And she's good, rug, and then the next word, and then she starts getting it wrong. But she really didn't know the word rhyme. But like, she knows trapezoid because of the games we play, and the pictures, and the puzzles, and the everything. A lot of kids are just starting with big deficits, and to me, that's a problem, and we should be doing more with education. As I'm sure people didn't miss, we passed a referendum to legalize marijuana in the state. And so it's still, if you were to ask me the question, how can Maryland do this when the federal government still sees marijuana as a controlled dangerous substance? Honestly, I don't know the answer. All I know is 10 other states, not 10, but other states, Colorado and Washington, lead among them, have been doing this for years. And it is about small amounts of marijuana. Some people were angry, so we passed it during the session. You, the voters, over 70% of Montgomery County, and really only one jurisdiction in the state didn't vote majority. So it was across the state, it was voted in favor. It also means that people who are in prison for low-level offenses and only had to do with possession of marijuana will be let out. The thought being that it has been a discriminatory policy. I personally believe that prohibition against alcohol was a failure. Ken Burns, the documentary guy, did a great documentary on alcohol that I recommend to everyone, the first 2 hours of it especially, but showing how it was a failure and, the challenges we have in this country. But I also think that it's been the same in a lot of cases with marijuana. Do I believe that cocaine and other hard drugs should be legal? No. I should get that out there. People sometimes assume that that's the next step. But so part of what we did was the referendum was passed by the voters, and now we have this legislative session to iron out some of the details of what it means and how will it be taxed? Of course, we will tax it. How will it be taxed, but also what does it mean for those currently in prison? And what's the process, and how does that all play out? And it wasn't easy to figure out all the details, so in a sense, we waited for the voters to say yes. I reached out to our speaker's office to say, what else are some of the priorities? One of the things we have to do is rebuild state government. And to some people, that might sound like a negative, and the fact that we have a 13% vacancy rate in our state positions might not seem like a problem, but as I was telling the rabbi, I'm teaching my newest class at the public policy school is an ethics class, and I love what I got to in the last chapter where, it said two main points. One, there are some things that only the government can do, but then it also had the caveat of the government can't do everything, and I agree with that as well. But I do think that there are roles that the government plays in service and things that we do in social services and otherwise that, if you read an article that a kid in foster care died, and that breaks all of our hearts, should we sometimes be surprised when the caseworker has a caseload of 100 kids? And how do we let those things happen? And so I'm using those numbers just as an example. Those aren't the exact numbers, but just the sense of, and I also know from talking to Jonathan in Howard County, where they are now I think the richest county in the state, but just how many what is your service ratio of school psychologists?
It's actually not that awful. It's about 1 to 1,000.
That's the top of the line, everyone. And I got to tell you, as a professor and all the things from the pandemic, the mental health challenges and things are so much greater. And so
The recommended amount is 1 to 750, but it's way better than most places.
Howard is way ahead of the rest of the state. So, what are we doing in that we aren't providing some of these positions? I've always thought it was kind of a cynical thing. You defund government, and then when it doesn't do its work, you say, look, government's bad, let's defund it more. But I think there are crucial roles that the government plays, and just the example from the schools, from the school psychologists to the counselors to the speech therapists, all of the positions. Let's see. Just other issues that whether we get into or not, but I'll try to speed things up here. We always deal with big healthcare issues, transportation, the environment, mental health will be top of the agenda this year. Personally, I'm dealing with some issues. The one that I'll explain is something called prompt payment. So when the government goes into hires businesses for contracting, they get paid pretty quickly. But if you're a nonprofit that has a struggling budget, your payments sometimes get delayed by 3 months. And people have had to take another mortgage in their homes to pay the bills at their nonprofits, even though they do business with the state of Maryland. It's, I think, a real travesty and something that has to be fixed. So I'll always end with we have the opportunity here, we have a unique opportunity that we can be involved in national, state, or local politics, and that there are avenues for people, and that there are different ways to get involved. And it's not just about writing to us, but it's also reaching out to someone who represents you and say, I really have a good idea, and I've told stories before where people I don't know, I've met them for coffee. The other day I just had a Zoom conversation with someone who reached out to me through Twitter, and we talked about mental health care and the lack of beds in our hospitals around the state when someone is having a mental health crisis. And He came at it really well, like he understood some of the policy limitations and the challenges, but just trying to talk about a system to make it easier to find out where are the beds. You know, when someone is having a mental health crisis and they call for an ambulance, they do get a police officer who puts them in handcuffs. And then they might go to an emergency department, and they might be locked up in an emergency department for several days while someone is calling everywhere around the state to find a bed for them. It's just, I mean, I think that's, I don't think that's the system anyone would want. So again, if you have that expertise, reach out, get involved, and you know, again, it doesn't. Not everyone wants to be involved in the political, but the number of community groups that we have here in the county and the ways to be involved, I think there's so many opportunities. So I apologize for going on in a few cases, but again, glad to be here today. Thank you to everyone here in person and on Zoom. And I meant to leave my pen with me, but I'll go grab it. But I'll take a chance to answer any questions, and in some cases I'll write it down, and I may then ask you to email me afterwards with greater details. Yes, Mr. Feynman, whose son I went to nursery school with. Aaron. Mike. Mike, yes.
Okay, thank you. I have 4, so you know.
Oh, okay.
Is there any chance that the state is going to codify with a constitutional amendment the right for choice abortion?
Thank you for asking that question. We did pass that in the House of Delegates this past year. Maryland is one of the stronger states when it comes to the right to choice and to bodily autonomy. And we passed that pretty strongly in the House, and the Senate did not. And the Senate president has since said that that was a mistake to not have done in advance. So I expect that to happen this next session. Certainly this case of saying you think something is safe federally and then proving that it's not. So I expect that Maryland will pass that this year or the next. Sometimes they don't like to pass a constitutional amendment in an odd year, as next year will be in 2023, because it won't go to the voters until the following year. So but I bet pretty strongly, and this state is has had a long record, and for those of you who have lived here since the 90s, or since at least then, that we passed a state referendum then with 62% of the vote in favor of abortion rights, and there's no reason to think that the numbers are drastically different at this point. So yes, I definitely expect that to happen. Yeah, Mike.
So the Supreme Court's decision regarding guns, what has that done to our state gun control laws in terms of their relative effectiveness, or even if they're still enforceable?
The first part of that answer is I don't know. The second part of my answer is that I can find out. But I'm imagining that, when I mentioned the committee system before, it's partly because we specialize, that I can reach out to my colleagues who serve on our House Judiciary or our Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee to see what they've been working on to figure out the way to ensure that we can still have the policies we have. And you could also argue when the states do it, it's not it's not a complete stopgap, because how far are we from different jurisdictions? And what percent of Marylanders who live, within 50 miles or 50 minutes of any other state that might have different laws? But I still think it's important that we pass these laws, but I don't know how the Supreme Court decision, but I expect that those smart minds are together trying to figure that out, and I can try to find an answer. Yes?
But if we have a lot of gun shooting in the United States, why can't we do something in the state of Maryland, make it manifest like owning a car? You have to pass a driver's test. When you buy a car, you have to have insurance. So why can't we do that with guns, that you have to pass a test from the state police? You go into a store to buy a gun, you have to have insurance, and also you buy insurance on the bullets, and each bullet has to have a serial number.
I mean, you and I were talking beforehand. I think we have fairly strong licensing rules, though there's still what's called this gun show exception, that the stores have to do something, but yet you can go to a gun show and buy things without all that regulation. It's, I don't know anything better than saying that how stupid that is. The insurance part, I don't know, but that's, like I said, I wrote that down. I can try to find out whether that's something that is being pursued and whether that passes legal muster. But, you know, we have a problem in this country, clearly, with guns, and that our other nations that we often compare ourselves to, other westernized democratic nations, don't have anywhere near. And then someone always then says, well, you know, we have more people. And I look at them sadly and say, this isn't based on population. This is based on percentage of our population. We have a problem more than tenfold worse than any other westernized democracy. And we have to do something different. There is no doubt, but I have to look into the some of those questions. Yes.
This may be an oversimplified understanding, but over the course of the pandemic, there were huge federal programs and grants to states, the COVID relief and CARES Act, and so these went to the states. And my understanding is that in many cases, these large amounts of money have been unapplied for the things they were intended, or maybe perhaps misapplied. And in some states, labeled as surpluses, where then the result is, well, states have said, well, we'll just reduce taxes and that'll be the end of it. I'm curious, where do we stand in Maryland? Is that the case? Are those kinds of issues on the table for this legislature?
That's a great question, and it's true, and we have that challenge in other ways. So you get federal money to be extra, and then a state's like, woohoo, we can put our state money aside, or we can reduce taxes, and we can be the hero and keep talking about how bad the federal government is, while, of course, accepting the money. What we've tried to do, just to give an example, in the field of education through our county, we have the 23 counties in the city of Baltimore, often referred to in Annapolis as the 24 counties, just for simplicity. But we've had a rule for years that if you get state education dollars, that you can't reduce your local dollars. And it was always something that we in Montgomery County, as a donor county, because we're richer and giving more money, that we're like, how can we keep giving money to these other counties who then reduce their own investments? So there are things like that in place. In the case of Maryland, we didn't reduce those state taxes. There was the thought that we could use this money for some of the needs that continue, and certainly through the pandemic, the impact on unemployment and the people who were struggling, and a lot of people who needed that personal support during that time. And there was also thought that some of this money can be used later for some of the education commitments that we've made to ensure that we have a more equitable education system. So it hasn't been returned, but I'm not sure about like the application for it and what has come back. But I do believe in this case, Maryland didn't reduce the taxes, but saw it as that we'll be able to spend on some shared priorities. So, yeah, someone over there, sorry.
Well, getting back to legalize marijuana, the federal government doesn't have it legal. I know that that's how these companies that do dispense can't use the banking system. How's Maryland going to allow South to deal with that problem? Because that means there's a lot of cash on these places, and they have to make some targets.
That's an excellent question, and yes, that is one of the challenges. Banking, I think the highest one. I don't know, and I think that's why the legislature has had a marijuana task force that's been looking at the tax pieces, the criminal pieces, and I think the implementation, or the how do the companies manage, and that is a conundrum. We've had the advantage of watching the other states to try to get some best practices, and for me, I was glad it took us a while to. Something I've wanted to pass, but I'm glad it took us a little while, so we have a few more years of looking at the other states to see what they've done, but I don't have the exact answer there. And the other thing that always worried me about marijuana, and people say that it's been fixed over these last few years, my worry always used to be, you go in and you get an edible, and is that chocolate bar that looks like a Hershey bar with 12 pieces, is that 12 servings or one? And so that was always my fear, that because it is not federally legal, you have the problem of not being overseen by the FDA or other ways that look at that. And I hear that a lot of those problems have been fixed, but I don't know about the banking ones. So, but I can.
The edibles has been in the news, but it was at school where 10 kids were at the EMC, they had the premium meds because they gave edibles.
Right. And so, how do we make it not look so attractive to kids? But we also know that kids, at least of a certain age, will always figure out how to unlock their parents' liquor cabinet or whatever else that it is. But yes, it's a problem. So yeah, how strong things are and some consistency. So I'll find out about the banking, but I don't know if I'm betting that we don't have an answer yet, and that's part of what will come out of this legislative session. So we punted. We gave ourselves a little bit of time to work out some of the details. Yeah, Larry?
One area issue that I didn't hear mentioned is the economy. One of my concerns, especially in Montgomery County and statewide, is hearing, especially from Virginia, the businesses that are attractive. And I view this as not something that's pro-business as much as trying to increase the tax base to make the state more attractive to people, and the more we can generate from the tax base, we can tackle some of our social problems. Views on that?
I agree with you, that idea that we need to do something better for businesses, partly because they are our neighbors that have the businesses, but also because of the tax base that they provide. Yes, I think there have been a lot of efforts over time to figure out how to make the state more competitive, or more particular, to make Montgomery County more competitive. You look at they often think of our twin over the river in Fairfax County, and how they're why can't I think of the right term? They're not kicking our clock, they're eating our lunch. I don't know, they're beating us, how about that? And they're more competitive in what they're bringing in, and that we could be doing a better job. I hear in some cases that it's taxes, but I hear other people say it's a mix of issues. Some would say it's the regulations. I've often gone to the business community and say, it's, again, there's not this big bad regulation out there, but like, what is the thing that you're having to file in triplicate, and it's a different form for the county, it's a different form for the state, it's a different, all these things that we make so difficult that, but I do think we have to take a better look. I agree with you that we can be worker-friendly and business-friendly, that there are some things that don't intersect there, but I think a lot of things could, and I think we have to be working on those things, so thank you. Yeah, Jonathan, and then the nice lady next to him.
With the introduction of the new governor and lieutenant governor, what do you anticipate will happen with the state legislature that may be different?
I'm expecting, the one thing that will be automatic, which happens anytime a new governor comes in, or at least one from a different party, and that's been my career down there of the back and forth, is that 5 to 8 members of the General Assembly will be chosen and taken out for an executive, something with the executive branch, as has my colleague from my district, Eric Lutke. So we actually have an upcoming vacancy in my district, which is its own challenge, and if anyone lives in Northern Silver Spring, Burtonsville, Olney, Laytonsville, or Southern Damascus, you're in our district, and you could apply for that as well. I certainly expect a policy change, but I also expect less demeaning of the legislative branch. Governor Hogan, when he came in, referred to us all as being on spring break and just partying all the time, and I admit, many of us work hard, and then some play hard afterwards. And there are some of my colleagues who only play hard, and that's not a good thing. I mean, the governor's brother was in the legislature at that time when he was making those comments. So I don't think there will be that we will be the governor's punching bag rhetorically in that way, and that will be a plus. He picked a lieutenant governor that is who is friends to many of us, who was a member of the legislature, and so I think that enhances the relationships. I always like to make sure to tell people that she was one of the 4 people holding up our chuppah at the wedding, so we are even closer with our lieutenant governor candidate, and she is, I always would say, I would have always described her as a person in politics with no artifice, with no, she's just a good person. But I think she will be a good connection to the legislature and some of those relationships. And I like to think, again, less beating up of the government, less beating up of the legislative branch. I don't think it's a useful ever to use us as the foil, because I think it just further poisons the process for everyone else in terms of that respect for government, understanding its unique role, but maybe, you know, what it should and shouldn't do, but also understanding that it's not just this big evil thing. So I definitely expect that will be a difference. I also hope that he maybe testifies on bills that he cares about. People made a big deal about that fact. Governor O'Malley, when he was in for 8 years, would testify on bills that were his priorities, and that never happened during the 8 years of Governor Hogan, and he always just seemed absent in that regard. And he would have gotten respect at those committee hearings, but I think he would. So I just expect more engagement. So I hope. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I jumped ahead. I forgot that I had already said some, and I don't know your name. Julia. Sorry. Thank you.
A friend of ours had applied for unemployment insurance, and it was a mess. Forms-wise, back and forth, it took more than 2 years to get what this person deserved. It may relate back to what we were discussing about businesses not coming here and the red tape that goes with it. So I think that there is a definite problem. I don't know what you know about it, but that's something that needs to be addressed.
It was a failure of a few things, I think, with our unemployment system. And part of it was built to handle only so many thousands of cases at a time. And then with the pandemic, it was overloaded. And so the reality of that. Now, but I would also go with the other point that I was making about the underfunding of government, that we probably got rid of people, that we don't have the best computer systems, because people are like, oh, hey, that new road or that new bridge, how lovely, I'm glad my tax dollars are going to that. But do you really get excited when you hear that the different agencies have updated their computer systems and the computer systems can talk to each other, and yet that's not sexy, no one seems to care about it, and yet that's part of the reason why we have some of these challenges. And it was unfortunate with the unemployment. People would call our offices, and they had a process that the four of us who represent District 14, that we're sitting right now in District 19. The four of us who represent District 14 would combine our lists, and every other Friday would send it to the Department of Labor, and those people got to the front of the list. And great for the people who contacted us, but shame on the system that it had to work that way. And the number of people, and the times people would stay home from work and make hundreds, if not 1,000 phone calls over a day or two and not get answered a single time. And it was just a broken system. And I mean, part of it was the reality of, it was a natural disaster of a sort. You're never going to have the kind of staff that's available for the pandemic and that many people unemployed at once. But they didn't have the capacity to ramp it up. And, you know, in some cases, I'm not fully knowledgeable in that. And any one of you who works in tech or anything related to computers or anything with customer service, you can't just suddenly have a call center with the 30 of us in the room and then somehow hire another 300 people overnight and have them ready to handle people's issues. But it definitely was a failure of state government, and we tried to do a lot of things to facilitate those systems and help people with getting more direct support to people and faster. But yeah, it was not well done. And these are the times we have to remember that we need a functioning government to be able to do those things, and that for most people, it's that safety net that most of us don't want or need really the government too often, but when we need it, we expect it to be there, and it was a real failure. And again, that goes back to, let's not demean government, let's not underpay state workers as we do. It's far easier for a Maryland state employee to go to the federal government or to some of our counties if they want to make a better living, and that's really not helping with the service either. So not really a good answer. I feel bad for your friend and everyone else who struggled with the system. It was ill-equipped to handle the problem.
So, with the Supreme Court overturning the statute on guns, which Maryland tried to post, I assume that guns will be a major topic of discussion. What else?
I mean, just the things I already mentioned about marijuana, education, rebuilding state government. Again, I was glad that the abortion question was asked, because I think that will be something that will go presumably a lot easier and a lot quicker than it did before. Yeah, I was trying to find out from other people what they see the top issues coming down the pike, and so it's a little bit hard to tell, and it's somewhat unclear what the governor's priorities might be also. So that's part of it. So, but yes, I was glad that, I mean, 3 of you now have brought up guns, so I have no doubt that will be one of our priorities. Yes.
The expansion of public preschool has been floated around for quite a few years. Any chance there'll be more movement on that?
Thank you. The question about expanding public preschools, I would expect that would be one of the priorities, and when we have the money to do so, and the evidence has been there for more than my lifetime to suggest that high quality preschool education makes a long-term difference. The mistake that we've made in the past is thinking that it can inoculate against poverty when it has to be followed up by so many other things in the public school system thereafter, but that it is quite the necessity. Again, when I talk about my daughter and her words and her books and what she will bring with her to kindergarten, and really kids just fall further and further behind. And so we have to do more in those first few years, but we have to maintain it and understand that children with fewer resources, their school systems need more money than maybe Rockville High School next door, because just the number of students with certain deficits. So we keep expanding it. We can't expand it overnight, as has been recommended not by you but by others in the past, because we need the physical space for the buildings. We need to train the teachers. We need to pay the teachers more. We need to professionalize it. Why is someone staying in the profession when it's low paid? So there's a lot of things that go with it, but I think, I mean, it's a winner as a policy in that there's, it helps the kids, it helps our economy long term, it pays the money back, all of those things, but still needing that upfront money. So, but I think you're right that now is the time, given the financial situation in Maryland. So, Gene had his hand up for a while.
For years, the county executive in Montgomery County has talked about the possibly widening the Route 270 corridor, either for automobiles or perhaps trains or something of that nature coming up. Do you see anything in the next 5 years?
The question about widening 270, whether it's for cars or for transit, we've had a lot of those issues and a lot of those debates and you know, conversation about what to do with our beltway and widening other roads, and it's always the balance between when you widen them, you're not dealing with some of the other concerns of, you know, transit and getting people to move around. And then there's conversations today that, you know, the world has changed since the pandemic. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses have figured out that, in fact, they don't need to see you 5 days a week, and that maybe people aren't on the roads that much. But at the same time, boy, I know a lot of people who are working at home these days, but I feel like the traffic is just as bad as it once was a few years ago. So maybe people are going out more for other reasons, but it's always a hard balance between widening the roads and looking at some of the other alternatives and what are all the other smart growth ways of having people attracted more to maybe like a town center idea, that they're not having to go all the different places. So that's a tough area for me to predict, because it's hard to get everyone behind it. There's all the environmental concerns, but I think we have to realize that all the road studies that were done in the last few decades didn't allow for a workforce that was going to work from home a little more often. So we might have to rethink how we do some of that analysis. So yeah, I can't predict there. I'm sorry.
So
Yes.
following up on that, there were all these studies about widening the bridge, and that's where it got punted to the next administration. Is something going to happen with that?
I unfortunately have to go back to that same place. I don't know. And
Because that might be affecting businesses not wanting to locate in Montgomery County. It's
Sure.
more convenient with roads in Virginia.
right. That definitely is something that's been mentioned, and that was one of the reasons why finally all those years ago, not that I was in favor, but finally all those years ago, the inter-county connector was built. So to allow for that connection between, for example, Western Montgomery County and getting to the airport here, Thurgood Marshall BWI Airport. So, yeah, I don't know if again, it's everything with road projects. That's where you tie in local government, state government, federal government, all these environmental rules. So they're, and that's part of the reason why they take so long. Yeah, I'm not sure if that's coming this time. And I would also suspect that this governor might not have it on his first year priority, but he does have the advantage that his lieutenant governor was transportation engineer in Montgomery County. So she does bring some of that expertise. So I'm hoping that that's one of the areas that he asks her to, be involved with because of that professional knowledge that she has. But I don't know the answer. Neil, yes, the University of Maryland women are going to win today, Neil.
Well, we play Nebraska, so we better win.
Well, we're both going to be at the game later today.
So you repeated something you said earlier, so I thought I would repeat something I asked you about a few years ago.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And that is that in Maryland state constitution, it requires that you have a declaration of belief in the existence of God in order to hold office. And as you mentioned, obviously the Supreme Court declared that unconstitutional. And yet, it remains in our state constitution. So, two things. First, obviously, it's embarrassing that it's still in our state constitution. But also, we've seen that, supposedly settled law at the whim of 5 Supreme Court justices can be overturned, in which case we still have this poison pill in our constitution. So, do you think it's time we took this language out?
Yes. I do know that, say finally a straight answer for me. So our state constitution has probably a lot of things that need to come out. I think our state constitution has also been amended to have all this information about like parking in Baltimore City. It's like, why is parking in the state constitution? But I agree with you that our Declaration of Rights and our state constitution should no longer have the language about needing to believe in God to be an office holder. And so it would create fights now, but at the same time, you're right, we have to worry about how some will make that connection and sadly how some will connect it to their God and not to maybe belief in a God. And that's really the challenge. And that's, always as I felt as a Jewish person, anything about religious freedom, because if it's anything related to religion, it's never going to be ours. So we have to watch out for those things. So I'm sure you heard that the state attorney general did recently wipe out a whole bunch of old laws and regulations that had to do with, I don't even remember all the issues. Warren is nodding his head. What? But more than that, I also think about other marriage rights and about, I don't know. It was a whole range of things that were old and not applicable anymore, but still on the books. And so this would be a slightly harder one, but I still think you are right that it should be done.
Does it have to be at the Constitutional Convention, or can you just have it as an election question?
I think it would be an election question. Probably be anytime we change the state constitution, it has to go back to the voters. Sally is going to get you if you don't ask it quite fast.
On a lighter note, is there any movement to change the state song?
For the question about the state song, there has been attempts. I thought we finally passed something.